This is House Planning Help episode 153. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is Phill Skill from Stroud District Council and Gloucestershire Building Control Partnership. He also featured in the TV documentary The Planners a couple of years ago. We're going to be getting to grips with building regulations and what it means to us when we're building a house. First though, I always like to do this before we get into an interview, try and give you some useful bit of information, perhaps share a resource or something that I think could help you on your journey. And today, that is just merely a question. Have you been to the Potton Show Centre and had a look around? It's somewhere I've been a number of times because Potton has been one of our clients at Regen Media. And in fact, we're working on a video trying to encourage people to come to the centre. And so that means in terms of development that we're working out what's the best way to do that and get into it. And I've actually been interviewing lots of people about why have you been here? What is it that draws you in, or what have you found useful? And that's when I realised that I should really get my wife up there as well. And we can go, you can go as a family, but just to take a look around. And a lot of people were saying to me, it's really about inspiration and getting ideas, understanding space. Just how big is 20 square metres or more than that? And you can see as you go around these houses, and would this serve me well with this number of rooms? Because when you've got that blank slate, it's also difficult, isn't it? Where exactly do you start? Then there were the other people that I bumped into who perhaps there's some way through their build and are looking for something particular. This happens at conferences too, that you can go to conferences at different levels. Level 1, I would say, is going to chat about how it all works, how do you do it, learn something while you're there. And then you go past all the stands. You might want to go and have a chat, but actually you've no reason to go and chat to most of these people. So that's another level of people who are engaged in a project up to some level and have come to check out door handles or whatever it may be. So I'm going to link that into the show notes because I think it is definitely worth a trip. It's near to St Neots in Cambridgeshire, and we'll link you to Potton so you can go and check it out. And I'll probably give it another plug in the new year when we've got the video, because that will then allow you to get a good overview of why you should go and check it out. So building regulations today, not a subject that we've covered before on the podcast, so certainly overdue there. And Phill Skill, he's returning. We chatted to him in episode 112. We'll link that in the show notes in case you haven't heard that one. But Phill knows his stuff. He's also a great guy and quite good at simplifying the information because it can get complex. So I started by asking Phill, what are building regulations?
Okay, building regulations deals with the physical structure of the building. It's there to make the occupants as safe as possible. It's all about health and safety in and around buildings. That's its strap line, if you like. So it deals with foundations, it deals with the wall structure, it deals with the floors, it deals with drainage. It even now deals with some electrical supplies, but it also deals with what happens in a case of a fire, so fire precautions as well. But effectively, it's the physical structure of the building.
Who created this in the first place?
Well, it goes back prior to planning law. So this goes back to the Great Fire of London. So it was all about making sure that buildings were non-combustible. So the first building regulations were to stop people putting thatched roofs in built-up areas. And then we started with space separation, keeping buildings apart so the fire didn't leap from one to the other. So it started with fire precautions and then moved on from there. So it goes really back to those, to Pudding Lane and that Great Fire of London. But the modern building regulation started around about 1930s with the Public Health Act, which dealt with it. And the current version is enshrined in the 1984 Building Act.
I know that there are these various different letters, so I don't know, is it worth explaining what all of these are, or is this such an intricate part that it's really just down to the builder that we work with? How much will we have to do or know about ourselves?
The onus of the building regulations is on the house owner, not the builder. Okay, so if something goes wrong, we don't come after the builder, we come after the home owner. Now, you should have a contract with that builder which will indemnify you. So if he's done anything wrong or she's done anything wrong, we come after you and you go through contract back to the builder. So it's really important to know that the legal obligation is with the house owner, with the property owner, not with the builder. In England, it's not the same as in many countries, but in England, you do not have to be qualified to be a builder. So a DIY is very, very popular because you don't actually have to have any qualifications to do the work. But yeah, the onus of it all comes back on the owner.
So you are looking to fulfill a number of points on a list effectively. I know we're talking about a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's not getting 75% and we'll let you build it. It's getting 100% and we'll let you build it. But what's important with the English and Welsh building regulation system, and the Scottish is very similar, is that there are regulations, and there, if you ever get a hold of a copy of the building regs, they're the bits in green background. They're the regulations, and those regulations effectively, let's say for instance for the staircase, I'll paraphrase, for staircases should be built so you don't fall down them. That's the regulation. Then there are these things called approved documents, and the approved documents tell you how you comply with that. So the regulations are very simple, broad brush, motherhood and apple pie. The approved documents tell you how to comply. So, for instance, stairs, it will tell you how high each step should be and how deep each step should be, what angle the stair should be to be usable. But the regulations just say you should be able to safely use a staircase.
How do you know that we are complying with these regulations? And are we submitting our plans? Are you coming out on site?
Okay, again, in the English system, the Scottish system is different, but in the English system, there are two ways of doing this. The first is that you can have a set of drawings prepared by a draftsman or an architect. They are submitted to the council. The council will take a few weeks to have a look at them, see if they're compliant, write to you and ask you to change them if they're not. And at the end of it, you should get an approval notice. Now, it's your job then to build in accordance with those drawings. Okay, you can vary them, but that's an intricacy we can deal with later. The alternative method is a building notice where you don't put any drawings in and you get more inspections than normal. So what we're doing is, instead of front loading the operation with a set of drawings, this is back loading, where we actually come out and see you while you're doing the work. There's a pros and cons. Obviously, the pro of not having all those drawings is you don't have to pay an architect or a draftsman. The negative of that is now you don't have anything in which to have a contract between you and the builder. So you don't actually know what the builder's going to build because you haven't given him any drawings. But the other point is that as you're building your house, we'll come and look at it after you've done it. And what happens if it's wrong? You're going to have to take it out, fix it, and put it back again at your cost because you got it wrong. We found you got it wrong. You've got to correct it. Whereas with the drawings should be correct. You build to the drawings and you shouldn't have any problems. So it's all about front loading. I would never recommend to anyone that they build a house under the building notice method. They really should have their drawings sorted. They're going to need all sorts of other things like mortgages or an architect to sign off on work so they can get an architect certificate. That's not my field, but I do understand that's how that works. So having the drawings is very important for building your own house.
Is this a service that the council is providing, or are there fees that come with this stage?
30 odd years ago, it used to be free, and the local authority had a monopoly. You could only go to the council, just like planning, you could only go to the council for building regulations. And then in the Thatcher years, there was a change in emphasis and things started to be deregulated. And you can now go to either to the council to have this work approved, or you can go to what's called an approved inspector. Now, an approved inspector is an independent person who verifies your building in accordance with the building regulations, and they're regulated by the Construction Industries Council, which is a quango of government. So there are two different ways of doing it, and there are multitude number of approved inspectors, and for each area there's one local authority. So you've got a choice of where you go. The prices are pretty similar, but what you'll get is what you pay for. The approved inspectors have to be careful because not all approved inspectors do this, but most approved inspectors work on a risk assessment, a bit like an insurance company. They will assess your job, your competencies, how many buildings you've built, and then tailor their inspection regime to that. So if you are a self-builder doing it yourself, it's going to cost you a lot of money because they're going to have to come out more often. With the local authority, it's effectively a fixed fee, regardless of whether you're Barrett's or you're Joe Bloggs. So when choosing between a local authority, who I'll be honest, I've always worked for a local authority, so I've got a prejudice towards local authorities, or you want to go with an approved inspector, the best thing I can say is do what everybody else does, shop around, find out what you're going to get for your money. And the cheapest is, as always, not necessarily the best. You're investing probably a year of your life building, but you're also investing hundreds of thousands of pounds in this thing. So getting it right and getting these details right is very important.
The council-led side versus this independent, are they qualified in the same way, or is the training different?
The training is virtually identical on the grounds that most approved inspectors used to work for councils. Not all, but most, because what happens is that local authorities train people and we're not necessarily able to pay people as high a salary as people would like, and the private sector can. So effectively, they're all qualified to the same standard. I think, to be honest, though, the local authority tends to have a higher standard because it has the governance, the way in which we operate. We operate with councillors, and they maintain our policies and maintain our standards. An approved inspector will vary depending upon who they are. Are they a one-man band? Are they part of a big organisation? Again, it's about looking into who it is who's going to provide this service and seeing how good they are. And just like a builder, go and get some recommendations.
What will be the difference then between a good building inspector and someone that's not so good?
A good building inspector will be somebody who tries to educate you as you're going along. A bad building inspector will be somebody who just turns up, says that's wrong and walk away. The law says that we're there to check what you've done, not to design it for you. That's what you have an architect for. But a good building inspector will offer you alternatives. So you might want to speak to them on one site visit and say, okay, we've checked the foundations. I'm now thinking of what sort of insulation I might put in the floor. And there are lots of alternatives. And the building inspector might be able to channel you down a particular route depending upon your ground conditions. A bad building inspector would say, we'll go and talk to your architect. So a good one is somebody who's there to educate, inform, and tutor you along. And to some extent, that's also what you're paying for. So, quality of decision-making as well.
How thorough is this check on site, or is it, seen it, right, tick the box?
Well, that's a good point. To be quite honest, the building inspector is not a clerk of works. They're not there all the time. Legally, you only have to tell the building inspector you've got to a particular stage and wait 24 hours. If they don't turn up, you can continue because you gave them the opportunity to visit. Councils always will visit because that's our policy and that's how we get insured. As I said earlier, approved inspectors may take a more risk-based approach, but that's what you're paying for and that's how you do things. But the way in which they do the inspections is that there are 8 stages. There's commencement, which effectively is tell us you started and we don't actually turn up. That's just getting the file out of the office and getting things ready. But usually the commencement and the foundation inspection go together. So you ring us up and you say, I've started and the foundations are ready for inspection. We go out, and that's the most important one because we want to see what the ground's like. So you dig the trench out, we have a look at the trench, we usually jump down into the trench, check the bottom of it to make sure it's firm, and then you can put concrete in. So we should then come along and see how much concrete you've put in. So that's the second inspection. The next inspection is when you get to the damp-proof course level, which effectively is about 6 inches above the external floor level and level with the internal floor level. So that stops the rising damp that we used to get in all the old Victorian houses. So that's the third inspection. We then want to see what's called oversight. Now that is before you've put the floor down. So again, we want to make sure that insulations have gone in, any reinforcing's gone in, and that your floors are going to be stable. Then there's a couple of inspections for drainage. One is I want to see the drains in the trench open up so I can check that they're all in a straight line, and every time there's a change in direction or a new pipe comes in, there's a manhole. So we check that, we call that line and level. And then the other one for drainage is almost at the end of the project, we'll either put a water test on it, which is stick a bung into the last manhole, fill it up with water, come back in half an hour and see whether it's gone down, or we can do an air test, which is very, very much more quicker than that. And then the last one is the completion. So between effectively damp-proof course and floor level, we don't see it again until it's finished.
Trying to work out the logic of that. So you're not really that interested in the structure going up or anything like that. Once you've sorted out the bottom or all of those bits on the foundation, then that's it.
As I say, as I said right at the beginning, the onus of complying with the building regulations is the owner, not the building inspector. The building inspector is there to cast an eye over it for reassurance that for future owners that it's been looked after. It's not really a check for you. The bit we do for you is to help you out with guidance and information. It's so that you can get your mortgage. It's so that you can sell the house, because you'll need a building regulation certificate to prove that it's worthy. Above ground level, there's not a lot that can go wrong with a house. We'll pick up at completion things like fire doors, flues, chimneys, above ground drainage. So we'll check the trap under the sink, the bath's got a trap on it to stop the smells getting up. So there's a lot of things we can do at the end of the job, but have nothing to do with the superstructure. But in Britain, a lot of the superstructure is either masonry, so that's brick and block. Not a lot you can do wrong with that. We've checked the damp-proof course to make sure it's not going to get damp, but after that, it just goes up and there's a roof put on top of it. The alternative is that it's timber frame, so that's very much quicker, in which case you've got a contract with a specialist supplier to provide those. Now, if you put that in with a full plans application, that's the one with the drawings, we'll check the calculations to make sure that they've done it right. We'll check that they're competent at structural design. If you do it on a building notice, you've got a contract with them. If it falls down, you go after them for failure to comply. So the building inspector is there. I think the way we describe it is that it's like a policeman on a motorway. The speed limit is 70 miles an hour. We will check that you're doing 70 miles an hour, but you can drive faster than 70 miles an hour. It's just if you get caught. So it's about being there to help moderate the industry, help to keep the industry compliant, rather than a clock of works who is somebody who's got a hut on the site and they check everything for you. A project manager. We're not a project manager, we're a statutory function.
So what happens if things go wrong? Can you give us some examples just so we can understand it? Are we talking worst case scenario? Take down the building.
I've never been to that situation. Usually with foundations, we'll get there and they might not have gone deep enough. They might be close to trees, so the roots of the trees are still coming through. So that's a case of getting the digger back in and digging some more out. We have had situations where people have just gone along and forgotten to talk to us, forgot to ring us up. Well, in that case, we might do trial holes at the side to check how deep they are and to make sure that they're down all the way. But the onus is still on the owner to do it. Obviously, during a career as long as mine, there have been situations where the builder and the owner have made mistakes and cracks have appeared in the buildings and stuff like that. Cracks themselves they're superficial. 99% of them are superficial because buildings are so robust that even if you do make the slight mistakes, what will happen is the plaster will crack because the floors will flex. They won't collapse, they'll just flex, and every time somebody walks on it, the floor bounces. Well, that's because they put the wrong size joists in. So it's rarely ever catastrophic. The bits that we do get really uptight about is things like fire doors, because if they go wrong, that's big news. That's people dying. A bit of economic loss, that's insurers to sort out and stuff like that. But if you're in a 3-story or 4-story house and there's a requirement to put fire doors with self-closing devices, springs and whatnots, then if they're not there when we do the inspection, you ain't going to get your completion certificate because that's got to be right. We know that people will take those springs off because they don't like the fact that their bedroom doors are always shut. They like the doors open, but they're there for a damn good reason. They're very expensive doors, they're very heavy doors, and the way in which they work is to protect you. On a 2-story house, there's usually no fire doors in there. The building regulations have moved on now as well, so that we've got things like smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. Even the building regulations now require the light and power sockets to be at a particular height, so that as you get older, you'll still be able to use them. In my day, the power sockets were down at the skirting board level. Now they're a good couple of feet up the wall. Designers hate it because they like to see a nice, clean, pristine wall, and there's all these sockets. But the building regulations is coming more about that sort of thing, about raising the standards with the builders. It's so that builders know what they've got to build to.
You've mentioned how the onus is very much on us, but presumably this is something that the builders have to get their heads around and the architects have to get their heads around, because all of these little things, much as we might want to stay on top of it as well, if it's evolving, how can they stay on top of it? Or are they just advised as it progresses through?
The government has a process of only change it. Well, there are about 15 approved documents ranging from foundations through to fire and electrics and stuff. And they only change 3 of them at any one point. So the speed of change of the building regulations is relatively slow. So it's not too difficult for architects and builders who've been in the trade for a while. And if there is a major change to any of those, it is publicised in their trade magazines, and all they've got to do is ask a building inspector, and the building inspector comes along and says, oh, don't forget that's changed now. You've got to do this, you've got to do the other. What changes far faster is products. It's products that are changing far quicker. So insulation, for instance, is a nightmare to building inspectors because they keep bringing out new insulation. So we'll get out on site and say, oh, hang on a minute, you should have 2 inches of in there, and then we've got, well, actually it's now gone down to 1.5 inches because it's now even better. So the products are changing far faster than actually the building regulations. So that's the bit that the builders and the architects are having trouble keeping up with.
Is there a link at all between planning and building inspecting, or are they 2 completely separate things?
I would like it to be more of a situation. I've always preferred the situation where somebody gets permission to build, not planning permission, conservation area consent, listed building consent, building regulation permission, discharge of sewage permission, all those other permissions that the people who follow you hear about you waxing on lyrically about continually. There's all these different permissions, and I would far prefer us to have one permission, a permission to build, and you got all your permits and off you go. But it's not like that. Government departments don't talk to each other. And also with the separation of approved inspectors from council building inspectors, that link has gone. So if you're using an approved inspector, there's no connection back to the local authority at all. Local authority building inspectors resist like crazy being the eyes and ears of the planners, but they do tend to be a liaison. So they don't usually come on site trying to catch you out with a planning condition because they don't care. They're too busy doing their own job. But if you've got a problem, they can be quite helpful in getting that over. I've got feet in both camps, but it's a lot easier to see when a planner is faced with a change in a detail on a property. Oh, I don't like that. I want this size window. To actually have the building inspector on the client side saying, no, that window has to be this size because it's an escape window. It has to be wide enough for the fire brigade to get in with an oxygen tank on the back and for people to escape. So, sorry, it's got to be there and it's got to be that size. Now, at that point, the planner steps back and says, whoa, hang on there, that's fire precautions, can't handle that. So you get what you want. So there's always a compromise between the 2 systems. And a lot of the variation of conditions that the planners get are generated at the construction stage because the architect's missed something. He's tried to make it all nice and pretty for planners, and then it won't work when he actually comes along to try and build it. So those variations have to happen. if you've separated the two and gone with an improved inspector, one of the sacrifices you've made is having that voice in the council to help you when there's those conflicts.
Are there any of these regulations, and you may not be able to comment on this, which are just overkill, somehow got into a list of too many things, or is this all just common sense stuff?
As I said right at the beginning, what I said was that the regulations themselves are the green bits. And the green bits are motherhood and apple pie. It's very difficult to argue with them. The one on structure says the building should stand up and be safe and stable. Yep, okay, get that. Now, how is it actually done? So most of the regulations are quite simple, and a lot of them are empirical. They are by trial and error. They have come about through years and years of experience. So yes, my brother-in-law is a fluid dynamicist, and he could tell you how much water can flow down a pipe at a particular gradient. He deals with oil, but that's beside the point. And he could work it all out to within millimeters. But the way we've got to our pipe sizes that we use in properties is A, because they're only made in so many sizes. So that's your lot. But secondly, over time, we've worked out how shallow the gradient is to get from a bath or a shower to the soil and vent pipe. So the rules are set out because actually they work. And sometimes you can make them more shallow and sometimes you might make them a bit steeper. But within that variation, they work. So why would you want to change them? If you change them, you're actually making a mistake. One set of regulations, which is a complete nightmare, is thermal. And the amount of glass to wall and the U values. And there are so many different ways of doing it. The government gives you a rule of thumb system where it says how much glass you can have per square metre of brickwork with certain thermal values. But what that does is hamstring the designer because he can't have the big glass facade and all the rest of it. And the building regulations don't particularly care about whether it's south-facing, north-facing, east-facing, whatever. Whereas the designer wants to take advantage of the south-facing, but he doesn't actually want the building to overheat. So how's he going to... So there's all those trade-offs. So the regulations provide this thing called a notional house. So if you complied with all the rules, that's how much heat's going to leave. Now design your property so less heat leaves. And that is a huge amount of work for a designer and to deal with. And then you get the bricklayer who misses bits out and it doesn't work. So it is quite fragile, the designs at those stages. And I suppose the other one that's always pain in the backside is you actually have to have properties pressure tested, air pressure tested, to make sure they don't leak. So you have to have a huge, great fan, sellotape to the front door, blowing air in and checking the pressure and how much air is leaving. And to some extent, they're going a bit overkill, but you can also see that if you want passive house or you want a highly thermal efficient house, that's the sort of level you're going to have to go to. And as houses become more and more technical, these regulations are going to get more and more technical.
What else?
There are regulations that some people push on and some people don't. It usually comes into commercial properties, but Part M deals with access and facilities for disabled people. And the regulations assume a standard disabled person. And there's no such thing. So it requires, if you've ever been into a toilet for a disabled person in a shopping centre or in a cafe, it will always be set out the same way with a tap, with a monoblock tap on the sink, which has to be so far away from the toilet, and there's all the grab bars that come down and all the rest of it. And to some extent, you can see why they've had to standardise on that and try and get as many of the different disabilities involved. But then when it comes to a workplace, you still have to kit it all out. Even if you don't have anybody with disabilities, but even if you did have somebody with disabilities, they would be set out the same way regardless of the disability of the person. So quite often we will talk to businesses and we'll make sure that the physical arrangement is there. So the size of the toilet and the size of the facilities and the size of the doorways are there. And some of the basics like the wash hand basins in the right sort of place. And then the owners will work with the occupational therapists that are dealing with the disabled person themselves to work out, well, what do you need? Do you need a grab rail there? Do you want a certain thing there? So sometimes the regulations actually stifle the innovation for designers, but also stifles the ability of the user to get the best out of it.
Just rounding this off then, you mentioned the certificate that we would get at the end of it.
Yep.
What does this mean, or is it just sort of the process is over?
Okay, there's 2 pieces of paper that you should have. The first is your full plan certificate to say that the drawings were okay. Now, if you did a building notice, you avoid that one. So therefore, the most important that every job should have is a completion certificate. Now, the completion certificate has caveats on it. So to the best of our ability, we certify that this building is complete and compliant. But it's not a warranty, and you can't sue the council if it isn't. Because don't forget, it was your fault, because the responsibility is on you, not the council. So if your builder made a mistake, you have a contract with that person, and English law is very specific. You go under contract. It used to be under negligence under the law of tort, but it is no longer. It's about financial recompense, and that comes through contract. Now, yes, you have a contract with the council because you paid them some money, but that's a statutory contract to provide something. You've also got a contract with the builder. You've got a contract with the structural engineer. You've got a contract with the timber frame designer. Any of those things go wrong, the first port of call is back to them. And that the certificate, therefore, has minimal value in actually giving you a warranty. It isn't a warranty. The warranties you'll need are things like your NHBC or some other form of warranty. And the other point about a completion certificate is your solicitor wants it. For some unknown reason, they won't convey your house with that one. And that's great for the profession, because you have to have that completion certificate. And you cannot sell a property without it. There was a famous case going back about 5-6 years ago where a solicitor lost his license and everything because he didn't have a completion certificate for, actually, it was an extension. But he didn't do his job. Now, the solicitors are so hot on it, you have to have all the paperwork before you can convey. So that's the important bit about it. Keep it safe.
Is there anything else in this conversation that we should be mentioning, remembering self-builders, remembering perhaps a lot of them are like me that don't fully understand this building regulations? We're just trying to fill in all the pieces of information.
For self-builders, yeah, it's an uphill struggle because you've not come across these regulations before. The advantage you have is all the building regulations are free to download from the planning portal's got sections of it, but a quick Google search will get you them. And they are in relatively plain English. You don't need a doctorate to be able to read it, but you have to be relatively intelligent. And you wouldn't be embarking on this if you didn't have some knowledge. So that's all there. If you're going to be self-building, as in project managing it, then you should really be thinking also about getting people who understand these things. So employing an architect, that's the best thing. I would always suggest that you talk to a reputable architect or draftsman to get your drawings done. That's the big battle over. As long as you build to those drawings, you're bulletproof. It's when you decide to do it under a building notice. So my recommendations to people is always use an architect or a draftsman to design it. Always use proper contracts with your builders, any subcontractors you use. Build to the drawings.
Phill, thank you very much.
No problem.
Head online to take a look at the show notes for this session at houseplanninghelp.com/153. You can review the key points. If you have a comment or you'd like to ask a question, then you can scroll down to the bottom of the show notes and leave it there. Links to Phill on Twitter. All of this at houseplanninghelp.com/153. My call to action is, if you're a first-time listener to the podcast, well, first of all, congratulations for getting through what can be a tricky subject, building regulations. But what about we rewind? Perhaps you want to find out about building an eco-home. What are some of the founding principles? I share what I feel I've learnt, and I've tried to simplify it so that each email that you get in this 10-part course is trying to just get a point across. So no jargon, just simple terms as much as I possibly can. If you'd like to sign up for this, it's houseplanninghelp.com/tips. Next time, self-builder Jeremy Harris is my guest. We're going to be looking at the challenges of building a new house in a rural community. Thanks for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.